production link incentive scheme is an important step towards the government's vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat. The prime objective of the PLI scheme is to make manufacturing India globally competitive by removing sectoral disabilities, creating economies of scale, and ensuring efficiencies. However, in its current form, does the scheme have what it takes to attract global investments, generate large-scale employment, and enhance exports? To figure out on PLI scheme, we have today Mr. Nitin Kulkarniankar, President Mate, Kunal Chaudhary, Partner EY India, A. Shaktivel, President FIEO, and Mr. Amrit Manwani, CMD, Sahasra Electronics. Mr. Manwani, let me start with you because you are closely linked to the PLI scheme. Let's step back a little. Your company was set up somewhere around in 2000. What has been the company's progression in the last 2 decades?
Okay, firstly, thank you very much. I would like to just explain Sahasra. The word, it is actually a Sanskrit word, means the millennium. So, we set this company up in 2000. So rather than call it Millennium Electronics, we called it Sahasra Electronics. Since then, the journey has been quite, remarkable, I would say. We have grown from year to year. We started, because we are in the special economic zone in Noida, so we started with exports for EMS, what we call the PCBA. And, we started exporting to the US. Initially, 100% of all our exports were to the US. And thereafter, we also started to increase our exports to Europe and Africa and Singapore, etc., etc. But even now, as 2 decades down the road, about 60% of our exports for PCBA or EMS are to the US. As we went on, we realized that for PCBA, you must have a robust supply of PCBs. So we set up a PCB plant within the zone. And that was quite successful. We started with a company called Nano Electrotech. And that we started in about 2005. And that gave us a tremendous boost in terms of our revenue. As the market was growing and we were growing, we started getting into LED lights. And our LED lights, which were designed by us, we had, our product was launched by none other than Sheila Dikshit, the then Chief Minister of Delhi. But soon we realized that we could compete with our business partners like Philips and GE, whom we used to supply LED sub-assemblies to. So we withdrew from the market, but what we did was, because we had the designs and we had the market knowledge and the product knowledge, we set up a factory in Rwanda in East Africa. We have a manufacturing facility since 2012, which is operating and in Rwanda. And by virtue of having a manufacturing facility in Rwanda, we not only have about 80% of the market share of Rwanda, but also we are able to sell LED lights in all of East Africa region. Thereafter, as we continue to grow, in 2017, we had a joint venture with a company called Mytech in Taiwan, which is a Fortune 500 company. They have a turnover, last year they had a turnover of about $42 billion. So, they were looking for a footprint in India, and we had some good connections with Taiwan. So, we have a joint venture in Infopar Technologies, which is a group company. And by virtue of that, we got into computer hardware in, motherboards for data centers and all-in-one PCs, laptops, also real-time video recorders called Dashcam. So that was another avenue where we, started to dwell in. Then last year, we set up this company called Sahasra Semiconductors, where we applied for PLI, and we were one of the 2 Indian companies who got the PLI in the component sector. One was AT&S for printed circuit boards, and we were for in Sahasra Semiconductors, we applied for ATMP, which is semiconductor packaging. And this year, we also applied for PLI in IT hardware with support from Mytech, and we were among the 14 companies who got the PLI benefit. So we are one of the 14 companies, out of which I think 6 are Indian and the rest are foreign companies.
Interesting. Mr. Kunkodiankar, uh, I think you are also closely linked with the ICT sector. So, what is the current state of the sector? I mean, I know we talk often, but I think the last conversation was a few months ago. How is the sector doing? In terms of what's been the impact of the pandemic and how it is moving along now.
Thanks for this opportunity, and it's always pleasure connecting with you, exchanging a lot of views, listening to the eminent panelists also. And Amritji just gave you a brief about his company, and which also significantly represents this sector. As far as we are concerned, like from a mate perspective, I would rather speak mate perspective as well as my own perspective. Last 1 year for PC and certain products was very good. Certainly it was good because of work from home, investments in healthcare. I mean, healthcare also created a lot of opportunities for IT hardware, and medical electronics was also growing, biomedical was increasing. So electronics is coming up in a very big way. At the same time, there are certain sectors in IT hardware which have degrown. I mean, they could not catch up with the growth due to obviously pandemic situation, buying power, and so many other factors. So I think this is a very opportune time. The global order is changing. People are looking at China +1 strategy. China +2 also is emerging. And India is showing a lot of potential. Of course, everyone would criticize sometimes looking at certain conditions in economy today. But I think this is the right time where government had decided to come out with this scheme, wherein the global players are also looking at recreating a supply chain or shifting their own supply chains. So PLI indeed started with mobile, and that's where we talked previously. But today, if you look at it, it is spreading all across major sectors, which has potential for growth. One of the significant difference in the previous schemes versus this is the government has very clearly mandated that they're not going to go ahead with import substitution models, and they are looking at export-led growth. PLI has created a scope for volumes or a scale, which never existed. They didn't try to put restrictions like value addition and all, but they say you just make scale, you manufacture the products, maybe 2%, 5%, 10%, but the scale was very high. That itself has created large opportunity for export. If at all you need to achieve those targets, especially for the global companies, you need to have an export focus. And this is where the policy shift we can understand. Secondly, if you are going to make that kind of scale, obviously you need to make local value add. You'll be compelled to make a local value add. Otherwise, just on the logistic model which exists today, it's impossible for you to export at competitive prices. So you need to create a supply chain in India, and government has adequately compensated you for the decision. Maybe some of the sectors, the rate is low, maybe 4% and all, but there are other sectors like telecom products. Government has conveyed very clearly the rates are as high as 7%, and that's one of the best rate. Indian government also, like PLI scheme also has, as they went on covering more and more product range, they have become more matured. And if you look at telecom sector PLI, they tried talking about domestic company also, MSME. They went beyond domestic companies, they went towards MSMEs and give them a very less threshold so that many more Indian MSME sector also can participate in this, which means a global company also would try and have a joint venture with less than 50% equity, giving Indian guy to hold major equity. This is a very welcome step. Component manufacturing obviously would happen, may not be on a very high scale to begin with, but 10 to 20% value addition is achievable in next 2 to 3 years. This scheme also can be seen as a demand aggregation scheme, which is very important. And I think government has to think little more broadly. There are certain gaps which we certainly will discuss later. There are other challenges, but at a time when China is coming out against India, China also is trying to hold back supplies to India. Prices are going up for the components. That means China also is anticipating a threat from this policy, which means Indian government has to come out more forcefully on this policy, back it up so that it becomes a real success. There are several issues which really bother industries. Merely making a scheme won't solve the issue. You need to travel beyond. There are EODB issues. There are state center issues, which of course we'll discuss later. Government has thrown one opportunity, but let me tell you, the biggest beneficiary of the scheme will not only be the industry, but will also be government. The revenues of the government also will go multifold. The GST collection obviously would go multiple times. There are other revenues which will come as a part of this multiplier growth, and this will benefit the nation in a big way. So that's what my take on this scheme is.
Right. Dr. Shaktivir, leaving electronics aside now, you're someone closely associated with the apparel industry. For a long time, apparel and textile has been one of the key industries for India. What is the current condition of the sector?
The current condition is for last 2 months is picking up, but we have been hit badly because of Corona crisis, because last year whole world was closed. Whether Europe or US, everything was closed. So we have to also close our factories, and Indian government also put a lockdown. So everything was bad last year. But from February onwards, we are looking good. But again, then March, April, we got the close down. Now, if you see the last 2 months, the orders are picking up. Why? Because European market is opened up, American market is opened up, and also online stores are opened up. So we started getting the orders now. Hope this year that we will cross the 19 figure of 16 billion exports. And also I see that there is a positive sentiment towards India by the customer as well as the buyers. So we started getting good orders, and this year is going to be better, and coming year also is going to be more better for us.
Right. Kunal, if I can come to you, why do you think the government felt there was a need for something like a PLI, and did it come at the right time? I mean, I know the pandemic is not in anyone's hand, but did it come at the right time?
Yeah, I'll just answer your question in 2 parts. I think why it was needed. I think we had a lot of schemes. Some were challenged by WTO, being only export oriented, but the cusp of all the schemes were primarily, some were export linked, but a lot of the schemes which India had introduced in the last few years were mainly capex, or dependent on how much you invest. Which clearly, I think was not what the the governments in the other countries were also offering. So investment is fine, but they wanted the government wanted the mindset to be shifted to a success or an output linked scheme. They wanted people to perform and then get the incentive, rather than only put in money, invest, and then get the incentive. I think that thought process was a very pleasant thought process, in terms of government also thinking that we want to be giving incentive to companies or entrepreneurs who are doing business, who are being successful, and then they have been giving incentivized more to do better. So that was one thought process which which was a very big shift from the earlier thought process which was there to incentivize. The second thought process was that the government felt that they need to create champions. By champions, they need to they said that there needs to be an anchor companies who will then get a ripple effect to the other companies. The earlier, most of the incentives were it was like spraying to everybody. A lot of companies used to get it, and it was small incentives. But they said that it is not adding to the ripple effect of the manufacturing. And as you would know, the India has been hovering around 30-15% of GDP only being manufacturing, mostly being service. And we've been trying to get up to a higher level. And I think for the last 10-15 years, it's been hovering around that level. So there was definitely a need to push these schemes change, and and I was very pleasantly because I was involved when the schemes for example mobile scheme was being thought about. And when the thought process of the government was very clear, they wanted a scheme which is output oriented. They wanted scheme which is easy to implement. And when the thought process was in their suggestions, they always wanted it. How do we make sure that we are able to disperse the incentive in a it meant almost like an automated way? How should we make it easy for people to get the incentive? So there was a complete one need the change in the thought process of the government. And I think it was at least I feel it is a very welcoming thought process from the government side. The timing, many will feel that probably because of COVID, the timing was not right. I think the first scheme only got introduced in July last year when, obviously it got announced in March, but got introduced in July, which was a peak time of COVID, first wave had hit in. But I personally feel that was the most appropriate time, because only during COVID, everybody realized that they need to think about the supply chain again. And I think that gave it a further boost. So obviously the policies were very nice, but the COVID gave everybody, time to think about how what is impacting them, where, do they need to put the eggs in one basket or they need to spray it around? And I think that was, according to me, was the right time. Obviously, because of there was a delay in the implementation of the policies, because obviously factories were affected, everybody was affected. But I think introducing the policies at the right time, at that time, was the right step, which which the government took.
Right. So less of spray and pray and more of a targeted outcome.
Right.
So Manwani, you already talked about that. You're one of the beneficiaries of the PLI scheme. I know it's still early days, but how is the scheme going to benefit you? Are you already seeing some benefits coming out of it?
Well, as you rightly said, it's still early days. We'll have to see how it goes. But clearly, it will help everybody, at least in the electronic sector. There are two things which are probably they are across the board for all sectors, but more so for electronic sector. We have major disabilities on two accounts, probably three accounts, but two are more important. One is the financial costs. The financial costs in India are higher than our competitive countries like Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and China, of course. One is that is a disabilities this PLI scheme will be able to help us overcome. The other most important disability that we see is the logistics costs. The logistics costs in India are far more than these countries, because they have an ecosystem of supply chain, and they have a very robust infrastructure. And we lag on both accounts. We don't have robust infrastructure. It takes several days for raw material or components to come from, let's say, from the port to wherever inside. Sometimes it takes a week or even more, and that adds up to the cost. So the PLI benefit that will accrue to people like us, it will help reduce the disability. And once it helps us reduce the disability, and with, as Nitin rightly said, we are looking at scale and volumes. With scale and volume, we will be competitive, and we will be able to do far better than what the electronic component sector particularly is doing as of today.
Right. Mr. Kunkurenkar, do you think, what do you think would be, the benefits from a scheme like PLI for the ICT sector, or for, ages now, it's easier for us to, import stuff from China, and assemble whatever we want to make here. How is PLI going to help the sector?
So let me tell you, as far as PLI is concerned, I'm sure multinationals and global companies for the first time are showing interest for manufacturing in the country. If you could see the applications for PLI, it's mostly from the multinational, and sound domestic companies are also getting into it. That's a very good sign. Second thing is the demand aggregation that will happen. For example, in electronics, it is not necessary that you need to get all components done here. You can start with plastic molding, sheet metal, all these kind of products. Look at the spread of these components. As of today, what is to happen because of CKD and SKD business, most of these components would come as a part of the kit and people would assemble in India. In the 90s to 2010 or 2015, this is what happened. But there is an immense opportunity for this sector. Once the lot of products, lot of electronic hardware products, especially switches and routers and other products, 15 to 20% cost composition comes from plastic molded products or sheet metal products. And by weight also it costs a bomb. So you combine lot of sectors, ICT, then you talk of IT hardware, mobile, then electrical, then plastic mold used in other things. You work on complete demand aggregation in the country. The volume could be one of the best today in the world. Not only for our own domestic consumption, but for the export also. You can set up one of the world's best molding industry with latest amenities. And with the high scale, this will help them a lot. Second part is, this scheme is introduced at such a time where, due to pandemic kind of situation last year in China, many supply chains were affected and they are looking at relocating out of China. And India never offered any competitive regime. I mean, there were no central incentives which could attract people. Lot of state governments are also coming aggressive with their own schemes without giving a reference to PLI, but they are coming out with their own scheme. If you couple this together, there is an opportunity which people can tap. The scheme, as it goes to the scale, will make components cheaper, will help spreading up of the manufacturing base. Within India, you will create multiple supply chains. Like for example, Noida is one supply chain for mobile, but Chennai also is emerging as one of the best chains. So like this, more than 2 to 3 supply chain locations would emerge in the country, which is extremely healthier for a country like India. It will also balance the employment and growth. It will create a very high multiplier for the Indian economy in terms of service sector opportunities, in terms of employment, in terms of India gradually moving towards a design-led growth. India in long term won't sustain by just assembly-led growth. India has to move towards a design-led growth. And I foresee, with the kind of volumes that are envisaged today in the scheme, India will emerge towards a design-led hub. If you look at some of the top companies today, they are trying to come out with electronic hardware startup ecosystem, or they are trying to promote and fund electronic hardware startups, which never happened in the past 30 years of electronic industry of India. For the first time in last 2 to 3 years, this concept is coming, and this year there is more aggression. I think this is a very welcome step. That means the startups will obviously try to include academic sector, universities into this mainstream. And this is how the spread of academic sector also will happen. More investments will also come in academic sector, which will create high multiplier and benefit the nation back. So I foresee a very strong design-led growth somewhere happening from 2030 onwards or 2027 onwards. a major shift will happen in India. The scales that will come up with this scheme will encourage people to go for even components. Component manufacturing also will pick up in a big way. And that is where India will become one of the most powerful nation as far as designs are concerned. And I think that's the way it looks like for me.
Right. Dr. Shaktivel, textile is another sector which is a part of the PLI. How is the scheme going to benefit this sector now?
See, actually, it's not a textile sector. It's actually particularly MMF garments, man-made fiber garments. What happened when I took over as chairman APC, I went through the whole export of HS code. What are the articles goes from India and what are the articles imported by other countries? We find that about 25% only we were manufacturing MMF garments and 75% were cotton garments. Whereas the importing countries also, they were importing about 75 to 80% MMF garments and only 20% cotton garments. So we went to the government, so we need your support to develop the MMF garments out of India, because we also reached the saturation point of cotton garments. Then luckily that PLI scheme came. So the government thought that what is that actually we required? I said we were big in fiber and yard of polyester or viscose, but we are lacking in fabric to the international standard. Then I told nowadays we import the fabric and we manufacture garments, but we have to produce the fabric here. So we need a lot of investment, and also to encourage the people to come in this sector, that please extend this PLI scheme to us. So government has agreed and extend this scheme to us, and definitely this scheme will work for us, because this will bring more people into manufacturing of above garments, and also more investment in the processing sector also. And actually, we already started having a dialogue with the international companies that they should have a joint venture for producing the fabric here. We have enough, as I said, enough yarn and the fiber. Because Reliance is the second largest producer of polyester. Same way Birla is there. So, but we are not getting the international fabric. So this scheme will definitely work for promoting the MMF garments. So this will be once it is introduced, this will be a good beginning, and also our export will be doubled in 3-4 years.
So good beginning. Now, what is the potential of a scheme like PLI, and how can it help different sectors in attracting investment, generating employment, and increasing export?
Sure. So I think these sectors, when they were identified, every sector had a different, aim or the end result which the government wanted to introduce. Some was to boost exports. For example, mobile phones, the main aim was to boost exports because, with the duty structure, 90%, 95% of it was already being assembled, stroke manufactured in India. So, but in some cases, it was import substitution also. For example, telecom, where, because of security concerns, they wanted import substitutions. It's highly reliant on, for example, auto, it was export. For textiles, it was both employment and export. So every sector, when it was chosen, there was a particular aim or a thought process by the government in which why the sector should be. And if you, if I see the trend, or if you see the trend of these, 10 or 13 sectors which which have been introduced, you would see that it was not an overnight thing which the government thought. If you see the duty structure of these 4-5 sectors, in the last 5 years, you would see that the government was already thinking there was a rise in the customs duty being levied by the government in all these sectors, be it steel, be it textile, be it mobile. So all these sectors were thought through, and every sector had a particular aim to achieve. I think, and I think all, obviously, large scale employment is, one of the sector. Their aim was to double the workforce, which India has. So, at least what I feel is that every sector, I think, and the government is working towards a particular aim to increase that sector. It will definitely bring in some sort of an industrial revolution in India again. I think it will reboot what we were trying to achieve. The expectation is that it will add up to 5% of the GDP or 4% of the GDP in the next few years. By value addition, by export. So all that is already there. So we expect that in the next 5 years we will have around $50-55 billion of export, which will come in from these schemes. So and value addition also, when we're talking about value addition, I will also wanted to bring to notice that if you see the journey of the schemes from last March, when the first scheme was introduced, to day before yesterday when the sector steel scheme was introduced, the journey has been, if you see every scheme, there has been a progressive development in all the schemes, and every sector is coming out with a different scheme. Some, for example, solar is totally output driven. If you achieve that, and it is, if it is dependent on how much output you're able to achieve. So I would feel that in each and every scheme, employment generation will happen, where for example, textile, for example, food industry, mobile, there is a huge potential for value. Then there is also a thought process on, we've now thought of the end products. If you see, a lot of end products are being initially being thought through. Now the schemes, and if you see the white goods scheme, initially the thought process was that they will incentivize manufacturing of white goods, but the scheme came as only for components and not for the final goods. So the thought process is that now by incentivizing the output, we've created demand. Now with this demand coming in, now we have to go back one step. We create demand for the components. And then once we create the demand for the components, and the next step is, like how Nitin was saying, it is on the R&D, which is on design. And once we are able to go through that design phase, then that once we have the design, then permanently everything is in India. Because if you don't have design in India, things to go out of India is easier. And I think that is what the government is planning. It will be a step-by-step approach. And I think the aim is to have design-led manufacturing. It should not only be manufacturing, it has to be designing in India. So, I see more and more employment, value addition. I think even value addition right now, most of the value addition we're talking about is 15%, 18%, 20%. Over the next 5 years, we reach 20, 25%. But I think that needs to go up. And there is also one more thing which government has done, and maybe I think there is also a manufacturing or make in India policy, which is for public procurement. Now that is also a very, very good tool used by the government to say that, only if you do X amount of manufacturing or X amount of value addition in India, then only we buy. So even with the public procurement, the government is pushing more Indian manufactured goods, giving them more preference, and pushing more and more global and Indian companies to manufacture and add more value. So, end result, we will see a high level of, obviously that impact is going to come over the years. It will not come, in 1 year. It is a journey we've started. Now it will, we have to travel this journey, and the government will keep on pushing, and even the, industry will also have to keep on pushing themselves to come up.
So, Mr. Manwani, one aspect of the scheme has been that, make Indian companies more globally competitive. Yours is already, I'm sure about it, but you look at the sector as a whole, do you think it has enough in it to make Indian companies, especially maybe lower down in the ancillary network, globally competitive?
Oh, absolutely. I am confident that we will be competitive through these schemes. I fully agree with what Kunal said, that, the initial thought process when the PLI schemes were introduced or initiated, the thought process was, let's create champions in this industry. And when you're talking of champions, you're talking of, very large multinational companies also coming in and setting up shop here for exporting. That would benefit the MSME sector and the component sector. Not only they would get a better scale, but also working with these companies, there will be a ripple effect of how do you make your production competitive. So I think, with a combination of MNCs coming, large companies also now trying to get into electronics. The best example is of Tata Electronics, who are coming up with a very large investment in electronics. So all these companies would give enough of demand support to the MSME sector, and with that kind of support with larger volume, as it is, we are competitive in terms of labor costs. We are competitive in terms of our design costs. So if we have the demand, then definitely we will be able to produce it at a lower price and be competitive not only for the Indian market, but also for the global market. And we are already seeing some green shoots by way of, a lot of people are coming to us, particularly from overseas, whether it's Europe or US, where they are saying, okay, with these PLI benefits, do you think you can meet these prices which you are getting from your competing countries like China or Vietnam? And we are saying yes, with these kind of benefits that the government is giving, we would be able to match or improve on our competitiveness.
Priyanka, your views on this? Do you think we'll be globally competitive now?
So I fully endorse what Amritji just mentioned. But you are right, we are going to get a scale, we are going to get benefits for the MSME sector. There's going to be a lot of advantage from learning. And a lot of multinationals are willing to relocate their supply chains. That's going to happen. But the biggest challenge we must understand, India's logistic costs are one of the bigger disabilities, and government has to address this. Today, India does not have any international transshipment point. The African markets, the Middle East markets, and European markets, we can address much better and faster as compared to China from a geographical perspective. But from the actual shipping line perspective or the port economics is better in China. India is one of the best port, is equal to one of the most average or worst ports of China. So we need to upgrade our ports. We need to upgrade our air connectivity. The cargo handling capacity has to go up. India has to come out with its own international transshipment point. Maybe 15 years back, Kochi was not feasible, but today certainly there is a case for India to come up. India has to increase its consumption. Average 3 to 4% consumption won't give a big domestic demand. We need to go to around 8 to 10%. So there has to be a very structured economic agenda which need to be created beyond PLI, which will also have a big benefit due to PLI, but it can complement PLI as well. So our consumption in India is mostly in South and West. Majority of the consumption is South and West, which are again equipped with a very good ports. Sagarmala is coming up in a big way, but that's the internal connectivity. What happens to the external connectivity with other major export destinations? India has to connect or create an infrastructure, tie up with ports like Salalah or Jebel Ali, or create something in Tanzania. Dar es Salaam port has to be developed. And with a dedicated shipping line emerging from India, that is also the need of the hour today. Indian government has to step in, create a demand aggregation there itself. Logistics sector also needs a big push, which will complement this particular move of export-led growth. Export won't happen. You are not competitive if you start exporting by air. You end up paying higher freight, not only because of the air freight rates, but also because of the volume weight. You end up paying volume weight, which is, so the freight range between freight difference between the air freight and the sea freight in most of these export destinations is almost 1:10. So you become uncompetitive. So I think this is one issue which needs to be addressed. And every transshipment today that happens, you end up paying $200 to $250 more for each container. So this kind of disabilities needs to be removed. Secondly, the ease of doing business. India needs a drastic reforms in ease of doing business. Today, the ranking methodology, what has been adopted by starting of an investment or a company, is not a criteria to decide ease of doing business. Sustenance is the key. Once you start a business, you should be hassle-free. The port customs should not be creating unnecessary problems. There are a lot of problems in the ports. Today, you talk about faceless assessment. Excellent step created by Government of India. Especially, I credit this to the Honorable Finance Minister. But look at the factual aspects of it. A certain port you are comfortable with, who are well acquainted with a particular product line. In a faceless assessment, your assessment is done somewhere where they don't understand the product line. So they start raising absolutely absurd queries and creating hassles. You don't know whom to answer and how to answer. So faceless assessment also needs a review, and there has to be a due consideration to the fact that you have been importing in the past and you are a settled importer. You should not be harassed. Secondly, the state and center gap is a major concern. Today, 80% of manufacturing happens in the states like UP, Punjab, Haryana, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra. And most of these states are not aligned with the central government policies. I think PLI and manufacturing or Make in India is a nation building exercise. It should be beyond politics. I don't think central government is distinguishing. Central government has come out with a most wonderful, transparent policy. It's for the states now to take it ahead. States should leave aside their differences and join hands with the central government or the industry, or it should be a tripartite approach, which will help nation building.
Right. Dr. Shaktigil, as I asked, does the scheme have enough in terms of equipping our manufacturing sector to be globally competitive? I mean, everything is not PLI dependent, right? Like Mr. Kunkulinkar said, some of the FTAs that we have signed have, worked to the detriment of the sector as well. And I think it's the case in textile as well.
The thing is, the PLI is nothing to do, as Mr. Nitin was talking about logistics or other things. If we are talking about the PLI or MMF governments, because we are not able to, we were so far not exporting that product. But other countries, like competitive countries, are able to do it in a full way because like Bangladesh and Vietnam and Cambodia, they have a LDL status, least developed nation. So the buyers straight away get nearly 11% duty-free imports. We have to compete with that buyers because 11% is a big amount. And when especially want to develop a new product like MMF garments, we need our costing should be done in a bigger, costing is to be more sharp. This PLI scheme will help us out to give a competitiveness with our neighboring and competitive countries. This scheme will help us out. And also, in apparel sector, if you invest 1 crore, you are giving employment for 100 people. So the investment brings a lot of employment. Not only the employment, not only for the, it's especially for the ladies. So we employ about 78% of the women workers. So all the ways this PLI scheme will work. This will, for some time, government has to have the scheme to for us to come into the manufacturing of MMF garments, and especially we have to price-wise we have to compete with the neighboring countries. So the competitiveness is really PLI scheme will help us out, and also put a lot of people to come into this field. And as I said, processing is one thing that a lot of investors also will come with the technology.
Right. Kunal, you have written a series of articles for us on the PLI part of it. But when it comes to electronics specifically, do you think our import dependency on our neighbors will go down as the scheme matures and progresses?
See, at least, I look at it at both ways. So, one, obviously, with more and more manufacturing happen, and I think we've seen with mobile phones that, it has happened. And with other sectors, it will start happening where, we will start, at least we will stop importing finished goods. We will start importing components, and then later on probably reduce that as well. and I see that the industry can be developed in two ways. See, for example, electronics is you know is a like what Nitin was saying, it's more design led. What is being manufactured right now probably was designed 2 years, 3 years, 4 years back. Now, if we stop importing and if we start doing everything in India, we need to have that design in India to start manufacturing. And if we do that, then the cost will go up. We will have to reinvent the wheel again, because if there was somebody who invested a lot in design. I think our aim, and obviously we have to balance it with import substitution with how much we can export out. If we are able to balance the difference of trade, because we import and we export, if we are able to balance that, I think that should be the aim. We cannot, and it is not possible that, and we cannot develop everything ourselves, and that's not possible. So that journey we will have to travel. It is not possible that I start. And for example, 5G equipment. I think there has been a lot of research which has been going on for the last 3-4 years, and now it's being getting into production. So we have to think about how much future technologies we can start designing in India, so that the manufacturing also happens. So dependence will reduce, import substitution will happen. But I think it will be the balance of the trade, which will essentially make sure that we import as much as we export. I think that is what should be the focus.
Right. Mr. Manwani, we've talked about all the good stuff, but when it comes to the scheme falling short, what can that be? What is it that you might have wanted to see more in the scheme?
Well, no, the PLI schemes that have come out are very good. But since you raised the question, I would say ye dil mange more. Specifically, what we would have liked to see, the IT hardware, PLI, they've kept the PLI to 4% in the first year and going down to 1%. I think that could have been increased to 6 to 7%, something to match up with either the mobile phones or even telecom, because that is very, very important sector. The the IT hardware sector is very important. It's going all over the country, and there's potential for exports. So if we could have higher percentage, that would be one ask that we would have. Second is the payment mechanism for PLI. That could be more. It could be improved. I'll give you an example of the MEIS, the Merchandise Export Incentive Scheme, where whatever you have exported, it's very clear through your invoicing system and all that, and then you collect up to, let's say, 50 lakhs, and then you apply to Ministry of Commerce, and they give you their MEIS document, which you can encash either by selling it or whatever, and it happens very quickly. Within 6 to 8 weeks, you've got your money back. While here, it's still to be proven. I hope it doesn't go that same path where you have done your work, but you get your rewards only 2 years later or 3 years later. Then the purpose will be defeated. So I believe that there could have been some improvement on that front. The third, last but not the least, is that as some of the other panelists like Nitin and Mr. Chaudhary said, probably we should give emphasis on value add. Of course, I know that the Ministry of Electronics is emphasizing that you have to keep on increasing value add as you go along. But it could be, that could be incentivized in the following fashion, that at least the central GST portion, let's say, typically it's 18%, so 9% goes to the state, where center has no control. But on the remaining 9%, what the government could do is that, let's say, if your value add is only 20%, then only 20% of CGST would be waived off. If it is 50%, then you waive off 50% of GST. So that will encourage people to increase value add and increase your revenue, because that way the individual industry or the manufacturers would be incentivized to produce more. These would be the three items on the wish list that I have.
Interesting. Nitin, what is it that you think the scheme could have done more? Is it also the case with you, ye dil mange more?
I fully agree with what Amritji has just mentioned. One of the most important aspect PLI is actually manufacturing centric, scheme. Manufacturing is not a standalone activity. It's an integrated activity. You need to work on human resource. You need to work on finance. You need to work on logistics, and you need to work on ease of doing business of the state. There are no attempts on that. Government in standalone mode has created a PLI scheme, but hardly any attempts made to club the state specific schemes, state specific assurances. Finally, my manufacturing unit would be located in a respective state. The state has to come on board, otherwise it's very tough. The labor reforms, we talk of labor code, but it's getting delayed quite a bit. You look at finance costs are drastically high. You see the cost of finance in the value chain. If you want to have value additions here, the component manufacturing, it's impossible because of the high finance cost. Component industry is one such industry where capex involved is very high as compared to the assembly industry. So we need to give them finance at a very, very low cost. And I would like to also highlight one more aspect. Source from India should be also given a major thrust. PLI does not, except for telecom, some of the components, PLI does not highlight the importance of source from India. If a particular value chain gets moved to India, only the corresponding manufacturer will get the benefit of PLI incentive. But that component value chain does not get, except maybe competitiveness. But if he's able to export from India by getting some good PLI, his recovery on investment will be much faster. So he will be more keen to invest more. So this is where one of the aspect government has to bring in picture, and they have to, I won't say subsidize, subsidy is not the right word, but incentivize source from India. This will enable and create Indian component manufacturers which will participate in the global value chain. That's what exactly China did. That's what Germany did 20 years back. That's what US has been doing. Participating in the component value chain globally is very, very important.
Right. Dr. Shaktivel, when it comes to PLI for your sector, there has been one view that, it's too limited in terms of, the scope and some of the other provisions like, the amount of investment needed and stuff like that. That is also, limiting in nature. So what do you think can be some of the shortcomings that can improve this scheme?
Still, we have not got the guidelines for the PLI scheme for MMF governments. Initial stage, of course, the Ministry of Textile discussed with us. They talked about green field project for 500 crores. But I said 500 crores is not necessary. You reduce this to 200 crores. So we have given the recommendation. Same way they said about 50% incremental growth only on the MMF governments. I said that's also not fair. So we asked for a 25%. So I think that whatever the request we made, the government may consider and come out with a scheme.
Right. Now, looking at different aspects of the PLI scheme that's been announced till now, where do you think what are some of the aspects that you think can be strengthened?
So I feel there are 2-3 areas where we can obviously improvise further on the schemes. I think one area, and I think maybe Ministry of IT is already done. I think there needs to be a review mechanism which needs to build in, which essentially should be like that. They should review it after maybe 2 years or so and see. And for entrepreneurs because there is no penalty clause as such in the scheme. So you apply, you get an eligibility, but if you don't perform, then there is no penalty as such, and which is right as well, because it's all projections. And so I think they should review it, and they should see that for entrepreneurs who are not able to do, I think they should reopen the scheme so that if there are new entrants who wants to come in, because because a lot of people were sitting at the side when the schemes, they wanted to see how it is being performed. And so that sort of mechanism, I think, should bring in. That will mean that essentially the fund allocated to to promote manufacturing, I think that is adequately allocated. And then you also have next generation entrepreneurs who maybe have developed over the next 2 years. You want to bring them as well. And I think that is one area we should bring in. Second, obviously, is value addition. I think we've progressively seen schemes now starting to think about value addition, started to put value addition as a criteria in the scheme. So, and I think it's a, depending on the industry, it's a good idea to have that also as a part of the scheme, which will ensure that the question of addressing buying from India and everything gets. I think the third area where it can be done, and I think it can be through PLI, or I think they should also try and put down or give preference under the Make in India or the government procurement to have people who are eligible, who are qualifying or manufacturing under PLI, to automatically be PMA compliant or Make in India compliant, so that sort of linkage, if that is created, that will also give another carrot for more people to start applying and invest more in PLI, because then they also get an advantage of public procurement. So if we are able to do these 2-3 things, and then obviously monitoring and ease of saying how the people, though the refund process and everything is still not started, the money is still not going out, but I think that monitoring should happen, and then whatever problems the industry is facing, they need to just make sure that it is a smooth process.
Great. So last question, Mr. Manwani, and it'll stay the same for all of you, is that, we have seen earlier that, there are schemes announced, but this one will make a difference. Are you sure? Starting with you, Mr. Manwani.
Yes, I think it will. Particularly for the electronic sector, you have to realize that India was a signatory to ITA-1. And therefore, all the product, by and large, both components as well as end products, came under zero duty regime. So whatever industry existed, whether for components or for finished goods, that disappeared, because India could not compete because of low volumes. They couldn't compete with China and Taiwan and Korea and others. With this, PLI, some of those, zero duty disabilities that we had, they will seem to go away. And the best example is mobile phones. When the government came out, they were able to take it out from ITA-1, and they said that we are going to have a PMP for mobile phones. And look what has happened. Last year, India made 130 million phones, and the export of mobile phones increased many folds. So much so that India is looking at making something like 700 million phones by 2025. That's a great achievement, and this is purely because of these two things, that India was able to come out with a PMP program for the mobile phones and incentivize through PLI. So the electronic sector definitely would benefit by it. I would also want to compare it. Let's say, people say, oh, why are these subsidies being doled out? Look what auto sector did, and the component industry became so robust despite any PLI given. There's a difference. The difference is that they did not operate in a zero duty environment, while electronics has been operating in a zero duty environment for the last 2 decades. With these PLI schemes, there is a ray of hope, and we think that at the end of the tunnel, we will have some silver lining, and the electronic industry will definitely grow. And to Nitin's point and to Kunal's point, that particularly if we combine it with design-led and design for manufacturing, both are important. Not only design-led, but sometimes we design in isolation. We have to design for manufacturing, being India specific. If both those things are there, then definitely we see that India will be a powerhouse and become an electronic manufacturing hub for the world.
Right. Nitin, quickly, we are running out of time. Your view?
So actually, this is one of the biggest opportunity for Indian MSME sector, especially in telecom and all other categories. If you look at it, there are price caps, there are severe investment caps for global companies, but the threshold is very, very less for MSMEs, which means a global company also can divert the business and manufacturing opportunities to the MSME, and they can manufacture and even export to their export hubs in a controlled atmosphere. So this is one very cleverly designed scheme which will promote many Indian manufacturers, especially in MSME sector, to move into a higher sector. Probably, like for example, telecom, the ceiling is what you need to invest is just 10 crores, and you get investment up to PLI up to 200 crores. I mean, that's a very good initiative. And 10 crores over a period of 4 years is nothing. If that happens, the government can really, really promote the growth of industry, and migration from MSME to a large scale would happen. And this scheme will set an example for India's future. I think it's time that we capitalize it.
Right. Dr. Shakti,
Yes,
your views?
actually, a lot of investment will come because, as I said, we are very weak in the processing of fabric. And there are good experts in Taiwan and Korea already showing the interest. Even in American companies are showing interest to come and invest on a processing side. So once that is done, then our export also will be doubled in 3 years. Because as I said, we are doing only 20% of our exports. So it will be good because the another advantage that above garbage where you produce, it's a round the year business. So it's not that now we do only the seasonal business of summer, but we are not doing for the winter. So once that of government, then we can do the round the year business. So this scheme will definitely will help our apparel sector to grow more and more.
Right. Now I will let you have the last word.
So I will. I think this, this has already started to make an impact, and it will, and the impact will start seeing. I think one, obviously in investment, we will see a lot of impact, value addition. I think even on labor, trained workforce, we will see, with more and more large companies, global companies coming to India, we'll have more and more trained labor as well. Our workforce will be more trained to do further high-end jobs. I think that will also lead up to a ripple effect on doing more and more high-end value-added work. So I think at least in the next 4 or 5 years we will, and we have to keep the momentum. It has to be a momentum kept by the center has already started it. The state government will support it, and as industry we also have to keep up the momentum. Keep on wanting more. Keep on doing more. So we will, there will definitely be an impact. It has started. We'll start seeing that impact coming the next 1 or 2 years, and it will continue. And it has to be long term. And I think that's what the focus should be.
So I think the scheme clearly has the legs. We need to get it to run. Before we conclude, a quick thank you to our partners and our sponsors: Cell Global partner eBay, banking partner Deutsche Bank, state partner MIDC, and assessment partner Care Advisory. Thank you all our speakers, Mr. Manwani, Kunal, Dr. Shakti Vel, and Mr. Kunkodiankar for being a part of this. Thank you so much.